Hello all, it's James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade, and I'm back here to go over yet another comment that Joe Biden has made during the last debate. And I want to be careful about this topic because, well, this topic is, one could say controversial. And it really shouldn't be a topic that should be controversial. And we're going to talk about global warming or the climate warming. Now, those are two different statements, right? And Biden manages to say them both, I think, in the course of his statement. On accident, I'm sure. Global warming seems to be this position that has been kind of created a narrative, right? A narrative created by politicians that they can use in conjunction with a group of scientists who certainly like getting government grants. And so in order to get more government grants, they keep spitting out the cherry-picked information that these same politicians want in order to paint a narrative. And that narrative is fear, and fear means you need to listen to us, etc. So I'm not going to sit here and say that the climate's not warming. In fact, I'm going to tell you, yeah, it absolutely is. What I am certainly at odds and disagreements with is that the world's going to end in 10 years, or we're going to get to this point of no return in 10 years. And I'm going to actually make an argument for my position because I don't want to just get labeled as a climate denier without showing some relative facts. I think it's okay to be not a climate denier, but a climate skepticist. I think skepticism is a primary core tenet of good science, and any scientist that tells you that they're not skeptical is full of shit, or they're not a science worth their shit. If they believe if they believe things are set in stone, that it's only black and white, they're not willing to actually do science, evidently. So let's hear what Joe Biden has to say about climate change.
Climate change, climate warming, global warming is an existential threat to humanity.
Oops.
We have a moral obligation to deal with it. And we're told by all the leading scientists in the world we don't have much time. We're going to pass the point of no return within the next 8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years, that's less than AOC said. Oh boy, shit's really bad. We're in a world of shit, huh?
Former years of this man eliminating all the regulations that were put in by us to clean up the climate, to limit the
Alright, we don't need to watch any more of it because it goes into the normal political diatribe that everyone's seen before. The same song and dance. So what we're actually going to do with the rest of this video is attempt to educate. And that might be tricky. I'm sure there's plenty of people who are very set in their opinion on this topic. But hopefully you can have an open enough mind that maybe you might learn a little bit of something. So the first video we're going to go to is from 60 Minutes Australia. And let me be clear. This particular video, while being very informative, the purpose or the framing of this video is to go along with the normal humanity is making the world heat up at an alarming rate and we're fucked narrative, right? However, there's a lot of good information that can be gleaned from this episode if one just keeps an open mind. So let's go ahead and watch.
much gas you get in 2 weeks, so it's producing that much year-round from every seep.
Yeah.
And the millions of lakes in the Arctic and all of the permafrost thawing, it starts to add up to big numbers. Should we try this one?
Let's try it.
Woo!
Well, we got a flame.
Are you okay?
I'm good. I'm so sorry. I lost the spear.
Huge.
That was the biggest one I've ever seen.
That was the biggest one we've ever seen.
But Katie's research is a lot more than pyrotechnics. Up until recently, scientists hadn't taken the methane pumping out of these Arctic lakes into their global warming calculations.
Once that gas escapes, which it will, when this ice melts in a month or so, all the methane that's been trapped in here all winter is going to go into the atmosphere. And it really quickly mixes, and it goes around the whole globe within a year.
In a year?
Yeah, so this methane from the Arctic affects the entire globe. Australians, within a year, could have these methane molecules over their atmosphere.
The methane that's coming out of this lake will affect people in Australia?
Absolutely, because this methane can get transported to Australia.
All right. So this is the part of this video that I basically wanted to show. And now I'm going to talk about a common sense thought process when thinking about this particular topic, and then the, of course, narrative that the video actually attempts to paint. So most climate deniers like me don't actually deny that the planet is warming, right? In fact, everybody's in agreement that the planet is warming. But the argument is, to what effect is humanity causing the warming compared to what effect does nature cause the warming? And I am much more in the fence that nature is the primary catalyst towards the warming of the planet. And there's a lot of good reasons for that. In fact, a lot of science to back that up. But if we're looking right here, we can see that these lakes in the tundra, up in Canada, up in Alaska, and in fact all across Siberia in Russia, you've heard about the unexplained sinkholes that happened in Russia where the earth just opened up and collapsed. Well, those have been explained. That's because there were huge methane pockets that warmed up, the earth above it fell in, and the methane gas escaped. Same thing as these exploding lakes up in Canada and Alaska, and even in, again, Russia. So the northern hemisphere, the permafrost is currently thawing at an alarming rate. A very alarming rate. Now, is that because of humanity, or is that because we're at the point where that was going to happen? So what do I mean by that? So everyone seems to forget that it wasn't that long ago that we had an ice age. And people are like, what do you mean it wasn't that long ago? It was 11,700 years ago. Which, compared to the over 4 billion years that the Earth has existed, that's a relatively short period of time. In fact, over 4 billion years the Earth has existed, there's been at least 5 known different ice ages. What? You're kidding. How do we know that? Well, we know that because of, towards the end of this video, you get into the, going into the tunnels here, and we'll just watch a little bit of the tunnel stuff.
So right now,
I was a Navy
Damn
SEAL,
it.
18 years, 12 combat
And of
deployments,
course this is
took
going to
medical
be,
retirement,
and I'm not going to
received
edit this
depression,
out. I'm sorry guys,
anxiety,
you're stuck with a commercial.
Doctors threw pills at me.
YouTube.
Nothing worked. Psilocybin therapy means a new life without suffering.
We are literally surrounded by permafrost.
Completely surrounded by frozen ground, we call it, yep. So it's about as hard as concrete, and everything you see in here has been frozen for tens of thousands of years.
But all the infrastructure that's built on the surface above these ice wedges is at risk. If it
is, and it's partly at risk. Even just constructing on this is very difficult. But if you construct under one climate regime and things are stable and it warms up into a different regime, that's where it can get kind of unpredictable.
It's a whole new ballgame.
It is, yeah.
So basically what you're looking at there is the Army Corps of Engineers has basically created a giant tunnel through the permafrost up in, I believe this is in Alaska somewhere. And you can physically walk through this very, very, very lengthy tunnel and basically see history with your eyes. You can see where the planet has been frozen, thawed, etc., through the course of time. And utilizing tactics like this, as well as old school tactics where they used to core the Earth and look at different corings, the scientists have a reasonable expectation that the Earth had 5 ice ages. So with the most recent ice age being 11,700 years ago, that's for those of you who went to school and actually had this in your curriculum, or maybe you went to school and didn't even have this talked about in your curriculum, the Pleistocene epoch, which I think I have a wiki page here somewhere. Whoops. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, this isn't wiki, but this is just an article by Kim Ann Zimmerman, but it's good enough. Pleistocene epoch, facts about the last ice age. The Pleistocene epoch is typically defined at the time period that began about 2.6 million years ago and lasted until about 11,700 years ago. So that's a pretty lengthy period of time, right? The 11,700 years isn't that long compared to the 2.6 million years, right? So it's like pocket change of that 2.6 million years. So if we believe, as this article will say, that the Pleistocene epoch or the Ice Age was 2.6 million years in length, and we've only now just come out of the Ice Age 11,700 years ago, well, have we really come out of the Ice Age? I mean, the Earth wouldn't have changed that much since that 2.6 million years timetable. And there's a lot of truth for that. So there's some information that a lot of these climate scientists like to cling to, like it's gospel, right? And one of the informations that if you do any research about climate science is you're going to hear about how the carbon dioxide level has changed from 280 parts per million that it used to be for a long period of time. So they're talking about it, what the carbon dioxide level used to be during the during the last ice age. So if 280 parts per million is what carbon dioxide level is supposed to be during an ice age, then 400 parts per million, what it is now, doesn't seem to be, how would I say, that extreme of an increase. However, they say that that increase, that 120 parts per million increase, has been recent. Only the last couple hundred years has that taken place. Well, again, we're looking at a very relative timetable here. We're looking at the end of an ice age that lasted 2.6 million years, then another 11,700 years of, one would assume, warming, right? What happens after an ice age? The planet warms up. And we're to think that 11,700 years is all that the planet needs to warm up from the Ice Age? That the planet isn't going to continue to warm up? In fact, the same planet that's gone through like 5 other ice ages is just going to, warm up after only 11,700 years? No. So I think it's a little egotistical for humans on the planet to think that Earth had reached some sort of equilibrium. So that's where the science really gets thrown into the weeds, is because their equilibrium point that they're choosing to use is the 280 parts per million carbon that they figured out from being the average from their scientific from their ability to figure that out, going back to recording what that would have been during an ice age. So their start point to what carbon should be is skewed, right? It's not correct. In fact, most healthy plants on the planet thrive. So plants, the green things that are good for the earth, those things that release oxygen, that consume carbon dioxide, those wonderful things that many different animals on the planet eat, and that you find them all over the place in your backyard. That grass is a plant, the trees are a plant. They're everywhere, man. Plants are important. They thrive when the carbon dioxide level is between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million. In fact, they don't really thrive at 280 parts per million. And 400 parts per million, well, it's a little better, right? But it's not 1,000 to 2,000 parts per million where plants really thrive. So what does that make you think? What's if we took the entire 4 to 5 billion years that the Earth has been here and then asked, well, what is the actual average parts per million over that entire course of time that carbon dioxide has rested at? What was the average parts per million? Maybe one might to think that since most of the plants on the planet thrive between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million, that maybe it might make sense that the normal planetary resting average for carbon dioxide is between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million. In fact, that's a very sane thing to think, right? We're looking at a very, very small window in time compared to the entire window of time that the Earth has actually been here. We are a minuscule little sliver of history compared to the entirety of Earth's existence. And now we're going to try to say that we've caused the Earth to warm up dramatically because of our cars and our industry. And you know what? We have. I'm not going to say that we haven't. What I do know for sure is that industry since 1970 to 2020, especially in the United States, has changed in a very good way. And what I mean by that is those highly pollutant industries, they're not what they used to be. So when I was a kid and you saw the gross smoke being pumped out of a plant, and you saw actual ash falling to the ground around the plant, and it was disgusting, it's because that actually happened. However, if you go to the same plants today, those same smokestacks, you're not going to see the same type of ash falling on the ground. In fact, you won't even see ash coming to the ground because we've cleaned it up. And you know how they cleaned it up? They modeled it off of human beings. What do I mean by that? So you know that human beings, when we breathe, we intake air and we exhale air, and that air will change slightly from its inhalation, where it will be slightly more oxygen rich, and when we exhale it'll be slightly more rich in carbon dioxide, because our lungs will take out a portion of that oxygen for us so we can survive, so we can oxygenate our blood. That's, simple science, most basic science. We should all understand that concept. We also exhale water vapor. And so basically what power plants and what industry has done is they've tried to represent or recreate the human process of exhaling. And so they're using water vapors to transmit the oxygen, the carbon, and the nitrogen, just like we would exhale out into the atmosphere. Except power plants are going to be transmitting a much higher amount of carbon than oxygen than if a human being exhaled, because of course they need, if they're being in an efficient industry, they're going to use as much oxygen as possible for the process of combustion. Now they've also found ways to filter out the mercury, the ash, the sulfur, and the other impurities that used to go out along with that stream of pollutants. Well, they've figured out a way to filter that out. And in fact, now when you see an actual smokestack belching its horrible pollution out into the air, that's how the left wants you to think of these things, is the carbon pollution. Well, it's not really any different than you and I. So are we polluting when we breathe? When normal human beings walk around breathing, how dare us? We're polluting. Because that's exactly what's happening, at least in the United States, in most of our industry, and a lot of the rest of Western society has adapted to a lot of the same technology that the U.S. has led the way on. So when Trump touts things like we have cleaner air and water than we've had in years, he's being, by God, truthful. We've come a long way in figuring out how to best exhale from our industry through those smokestacks, and basically they're mimicking the same exhaling that a human being makes. So if humans are polluting, well, then industry is polluting. Industry is just has a bigger breath. Your average factory is probably going to have a little bit bigger breath than your average human being, but by and large, they're putting the same content out into the air that human beings do when they exhale. So are they really polluting? Or are they changing the mixture of the air in the world? And yes, they are changing the mixture of air in the world. In fact, you and I today are changing the mixture of air in the world. We live in a time period where there's more human beings per capita than there were 100 years ago. And that's just common sense, right? The general population of humanity has grown. So there's a hell of a lot more of us exhaling our carbon dioxide. But is that bad? No. That's actually nature. So think about this. Just because we have figured out how to do industry, and just because we figured out how to make combustion engines, and these things that have changed the balance of the air on Earth, that was an issue when it was pollutants, right? So China right now is still polluting. They're still sending out horrible mercury and other chemicals out into the air that then gets into the water and the land. That, if you want to bitch about anything, go bitch about pollutants being thrown into the air. But this witch hunt about global warming is a bit of a witch hunt. And what I mean by that is, sure, humans have played a role in the planet warming up, and I'm going to say that we have played as big of a role as we have played. And what I mean by that is, there is no credible way to actually measure the human slice when it occurs to the percentage of natural global warming that was always going to happen. And that's where the argument really is in this process is the human slice of global warming 1%? Is it 5%? Is it 10%? Is it 15%? I think it's really unrealistic to think that humans are even responsible for 15%. In fact, I think it's unrealistic to think that we're representative of 5%. I think we're more around the 1% mark, which completely blows away the entire narrative, right? This narrative that human beings are the primary cause of global warming. And to be the primary cause, right, we have to be responsible for at least 51% of the pie compared to Mother Nature. And that's just unrealistic. Completely unrealistic. Especially when you look at what plants love carbon dioxide to be. They love carbon dioxide to be between 1,000 and 2,000. And plants have been on this planet a hell of a lot longer than human beings have. Or at least we think so. I mean, if you believe in evolution, then we've been on the planet in various different forms for quite a while, just not as Homo sapien. But that's a whole different ball game, right? However, plants probably have a much longer I don't want to say shelf life. Their window into their history on the planet is probably much longer than our specific genus of mammalian that happened to come about existence after this ice age, right? The correct recipe for mammals to exist after the ice age has been a relatively short window of time. You know, before the ice age, it was what? Dinosaurs. Dinosaurs ruled the earth. And before them, who knows what ruled the earth? It's hard to know, right? What was it like before the ice age, before the ice age, before the ice age? But plants have probably been here when there were dinosaurs, and plants have probably been here when there were woolly mammoths, and plants have probably been here when there were us, human beings. And they probably haven't changed that much, not compared to mammals, right, and reptiles. We genetically mutate probably to a much higher degree than plants themselves. Or at least we're slightly more complex than plants, which are a bit simpler of an organism. And so if they tend to function the best at 1,000 to 2,000 parts per million in carbon, then one would, again, make an obvious implication that probably the most likely resting point over the course of the 4 to 5 billion years that the planet has been here is that, by and large, the average parts per million of carbon dioxide has been between 1,000 and 2,000 parts per million on this planet. And right now, being at 400 parts per million, we're well below the average normal mix of carbon dioxide. And that's because we're coming out of an actual ice age, right? But for some reason, global warming scientists don't want to admit to this. Other scientists admit to this. There's tons of other scientists that will tell you exactly what I'm talking about. But their funding doesn't come from them making statements that help some sort of political narrative, right? Most global warming scientists get their funding from politicians who very much want a particular scientific narrative to be spun. And that's wrong. Science shouldn't be spun based off of politics. Science should be spun off of credible debate, right? I would love if there could be an actual decent discussion after this video of those of you who understand what I'm saying, are not pissed off about what I'm saying, but will take it correctly, scientifically, and say, well, you're not considering this. And this is why. And that's how science is supposed to work. Not by painting some fancy picture for political purposes. And that's basically what the Green New Deal is, right? AOC saying the world's going to end in 12 years, and now Joe Biden saying the world's going to end in 8 to 10 years. It's a very naive thing to say. Very naive. The planet's been here for, going on 5 billion years. Even if we wipe ourselves out in a nuclear war, the planet's still going to be here. And after that nuclear situation, that fallout goes away, the planet will clean itself up again, and it will go back to being a thriving planet once more. Just not without us screwing it up. So, again, I think we have a very big ego. I think humanity has a big ego, and we like to think that we're having a bigger effect on the planet than what we actually are. And because we have such a big ego, it's easy for us to believe the scientists when they say, or well, the fake science, when we say that global warming is an existential threat to humanity. Anyway, I'm James Johnson. Hopefully, I have shed some light on some of the... I'm not going to say myths. What I want to say is, hopefully I've shed some light on the more credible reasons to be skeptical of the science. So you should never believe any science to be 100%. You should always be skeptical. You should always ask questions. You should always question the science. It's good to think for yourself, not to just say, oh, that guy sounds smarter than me. He must know what he's talking about, so I'm going to parrot what he says for the rest of my life. And yeah, that's hive mentality. That's what the left does. So let's go about trying to be better than the left, think for ourselves, and ask ourselves, how much of an effect is humanity having compared to what Mother Nature was already doing? And I didn't even get into the effect of volcanoes and earthquakes and tectonic shifts. There's so many various other global events. So we watched the 160 Minutes Australia article with the exploding lakes that's basically showing huge amounts of trapped methane being released from the tundras and permafrost that are thawing at an alarming rate, a rapid rate right now. But we haven't gone into the changing of the tectonic plates, escaping carbons from the ocean floor, escaping carbon from all of the various volcanoes that are all over the ocean floor. In fact, if it's to be believed by oceanographic evidence, the majority of this increase of parts per million in carbon has far more to do with the escaping carbon coming from the ocean floor and volcanic activities on the ocean floor and the movements of the tectonic plates, is shedding far more carbon into the air than what our cars and power plants and the coal industry of Australia is doing. So I don't know if you know why Australia is so fixated on global warming. Australia is a country that's been fixated on global warming even longer than the US and other portions, because Australia, according to various scientists, is responsible for something like 27% of the carbon footprint of humanity in the atmosphere. And that's because Australia has this huge coal industry, and they are basically raping and pillaging their nation to provide coal for China, right? And China's getting all of this coal from Australia, and of course the narrative is that their mining of all of this coal is causing the world to rapidly warm, and how our country is so evil, and they have this huge narrative that's even bigger than the normal narrative that the rest of the world has about carbon emissions and how it's causing the world to warm at an alarming rate. So Australia has its own little microcosm of this, and they're very fixated on it. They're very concerned with it because some politicians are trying to use the coal industry as being the big bad boogeyman down there, and they're destroying the entire planet, which is a whole nother topic of discussion. Anyway, because of that, there's been a lot of good again, I don't want to say climate deniers, I want to say climate skeptics who have challenged a lot of that notion in Australia. And that only makes sense. It only makes sense that when you try to use some sort of science of this nature for political gains, that you're going to get blowback. And you should get blowback. So somewhere in the middle, between the climate scientists that are being paid for by various different government grants or whatever for them to come to these narratives that politicians want to hear so that they can continue to get funded, and scientists that aren't beholden to government grants of such nature. Somewhere in between is the truth, right? And I'd like to think that, yeah, human beings probably are somewhat responsible to a tune of maybe between 1 and 5% of global warming. But the planet is warming. And no matter what we do about it, that trend is going to happen. We could stop driving all cars today. The planet is still going to warm. We could stop everything. I mean, we could just, I don't know, commit mass suicide to kill every human being on the planet, and the planet would still continue to warm, because it's what was going to happen. It's where the planet is going. And until the general consensus figures this out, that we can't stop this train, we need to learn how to survive on this train. So that's really where global warming, or climate change, is a problem, right? Climate change is going to cause various different environmental effects. Maybe it could cause the ocean to rise in a specific area. Maybe it could cause droughts in certain areas. You know, what can humanity do to counteract these things? We could build dikes, for instance, to offset the changes of elevation of the water. You know, we are industrious people, and none of these things that are going to happen are going to be like, wow, I woke up one day and the planet, all of a sudden the ocean became, 2 feet deeper. What? No. Everything, this entire problem is a gradual problem, right? And humans are, we are pretty smart cookies, right? Or at least we're somewhat smart. Some might say that we're too smart for our good, but we know how to adapt and overcome, or at least we should be able to adapt and overcome. And so if, the average temperature gets, in 50 years becomes 50 degrees more, well, I guess we're going to have to invest more in AC technology, and we'll probably have to turn to a more indoor society, and maybe even convert over to hydroponics on a much larger scale. But whatever does happen, you can bet that human beings are going to try to adapt and overcome. And there's no matter what happens, it's not going to be this, oh my God, existential threat, the world is ending, we only have 10 years, and then we're all dead, BS, song and dance. That's just a fake narrative. Anyway, I've rambled on enough about this. Hopefully this was a good video for you. I'm James Johnson, aka Sulfurblade. This is my content. Hopefully you're enjoying it. If so, please leave a like and subscribe. And until the next time, all, peace.